Welcome to the Winning Cultures podcast. I'm Jason Piasecki. Culture is one of the most powerful tools companies have to attract and retain great employees. And the companies that understand that tend to win. We're talking with leaders who are building cultures that people want to be part of. Today, I'm joined by Gina Thorsen, CEO of Stormy Kromer, one of Michigan's most iconic brands. Gina, let's start by sharing your story.
Okay, well, that's a very big open question. So I'll start. You can just dive in and direct me, if you will. I'm Gina Thorsen. I am a born and raised Youper. Our company and my hometown is Ironwood, Michigan, at the far western end of the UP, part of the UP that's on Central Time, kind of real 10 hours away from Detroit, real remote in the state of Michigan. I was born and raised here. I was, raised in the home of an entrepreneur. So our company kind of has two facets. Stormy Kromer is what we're known for, but when I was a kid, we just had a sewing manufacturing facility that actually my grandfather started. Wasn't really a facility then, it was his basement at the time. My grandpa started it. My dad joined him in the early 70s, and that's the environment that I grew up in. So the home of a business owner, the home of a person who kind of thought he could figure just about anything out if it was a sewn product. So as I was a kid, we made lots of different things here for lots of different industries. The biggest thing that our company made when I was a kid was dog beds for a big pet supply catalog that was based in Wisconsin. I was a very arts-oriented kid, so I was very into music and theater and dance and wanted nothing to do with sewing manufacturing or, quite frankly, Ironwood when I was growing up. And so I have a degree in arts administration. I lived in Dallas, Texas for about a dozen years after college and had a very different career there. And I moved back home to the UP with my husband in 2009 and have been back a part of the business ever since. So happy to dive into any of that a little more deeply.
Yeah, so Stormy Kromer's in your DNA, so you've been part of it, now carrying on the tradition of what's been building for generations. And
Sure.
with that legacy, what do you feel makes Stormy Kromer so special?
Oh man, there's so many things. So Stormy Kromer became a part of our company in 2001. So and there's a whole story there. I don't know if you want to get into it, but basically
Yeah,
they
that
were
would be great.
okay. So the Stormy Kromer cap, I feel like I need one visually, but the Stormy
I
Kromer
should have
cap
brought mine. I
was created by a gentleman named George Kromer. His nickname was Stormy, and his wife Ida. Stormy apparently had a kind of a temper, and that's why he had that nickname. But Stormy was a semi-pro baseball player turned railroad engineer, and who was living in Kaukauna, Wisconsin, which is near Green Bay. And the legend is that he lost one too many hats to the wind, and he asked Ida to take an old baseball cap, a wool baseball cap, and add an ear band to it so that it would stay on his head and keep him warm. And sort of like, he went to work the next day and his coworkers wanted one. So Ida made a few more and a few more. And eventually they were made in a factory in Milwaukee. And that's where they were headquartered. And there was a local ski shop here that sold them. And they called Milwaukee to place another order. And they said, yeah, we're not making those hats anymore. The Kromer Cap Company made other things that they actually sold more of. And so this person who owned the shop knew my dad and said, hey, you know how to sew things, and they're not going to make Kromer caps anymore, and you should do something about that. So, my dad bought a hat that someone else was going to discontinue because it didn't sell enough. It's kind of a ridiculous business story. So that became here in 2001. And one of the things we really quickly realized about the brand, like I had worn a Kromer cap when I was a kid, because that's kind of something you did here in Ironwood. But we didn't quite realize how deep the history and the nostalgia and the love for the hat was until we took it over and people started sending us old black and white photos of family members in their hats and hunting camps and just all kinds of real impactful memories that people have with their hats. And so we started to really realize that this was more than just a silly little hat that we were going to sell a few thousand of a year in between the other things that we made here, right? That was the original idea. My dad's like, well, in the slow season of dog beds, we'll make some hats, right? Um, and so we realized it was a lot more than that, and that people felt pretty strongly about it, that it was an important thing. And so how that translates into our company and to the folks here is that one of our core values is proud and passionate, because we're extremely proud to make an iconic thing like the Stormy Kromer cap here. My employees love when they're out and about in a different town or city and they see people wearing their stuff. And like, we're very committed to taking what was just a hat and expanding it into a whole brand, that has lots of different products now, but still stand for the same kind of quality and authenticity and things like that. And that we can do that, here out of Ironwood is a pretty important part of our culture.
That's a great story. And growing up playing baseball in Michigan, and when you're outside in March and April, a hat that has flaps on the side definitely come in handy. So
Yeah.
that's a really fascinating story. You talked about your values. Share how your values align with your culture and really have come together to build the type of team that you have there today.
Yeah, I'll share that, my dad was the kind of leader and, very entrepreneurial. And so like pinning him down to like, what are our core values? Getting him to sit down and do that was like not a, not a thing that he did. And so, we did do that exercise, when I came back, and one of the things that we did to really put words to what we kind of all obviously internalized, but was to think about some of our really strongest employees and what values they embodied and how that translated out to the rest of the company. And so I really feel like our core values are not just words, they are real things that we live every day. We evaluate our employees, their performance review is partially based on how they embody our core values. And so I'll tell you about them a little bit. So I already talked about proud and passionate. That is definitely a key value. And really, when people come and take a tour, which we give daily here, public tours, very often you hear people say, I can just tell how proud everyone is to be here. And that is absolutely true. So that's one. It's very important. Another value of ours is world-class quality. And that it's tied to the proud and passionate, because we feel like just because we're in a small, rural, remote town does not mean that we cannot embody world-class quality. And so that's really important to us. We also know that our products cost a lot more than products people can get made in other countries, and we want there to be value connected to that. So the world-class quality, and the word world-class is really important. It's not just quality. It is the best quality that you can get in sewn products. Another very important value is one that we call built on relationships. And so when we think of vendors, when we think of customers, when we think of our employees, they're not numbers on a spreadsheet. They're not just names on a list. These are people that we have real relationships that need to be mutually beneficial. And over the years, that has resulted in real positive things for our company. Just a quick example, when we were during COVID, we made masks like lots of other sewing companies. And there was like a run on elastic. Like you could not get 1/4-inch elastic that went over the ears. And we had suppliers, because of our long standing relationships with them and the way we had worked together over the years, they were like hoarding their elastic just for us so to be sure we could have it.
Elastic and toilet paper.
Yeah, exactly. So, so built on relationships is important. Respect is another one, pretty basic value but obviously is really key to how we work together. We are, a family-owned company. We're a company that's in a small town. We have very long tenured relationships and employment relationships with people. There's people here that I've known since high school, and so the respect is it's almost more of treating people, like you'd want to be treated and like you treat members of your family that, you've been hanging around with for 30 or 40 years. And so those are really, the values that we have and these things that show up in the everyday in how we do things. And whether that's working with each other, working with customers, working with suppliers, or the image we project out to the world.
Sounds like a very EOS approach to developing your values. It
was, although we're not an EOS company, but we did use that kind of model to go through our core values.
Yes, it's a great framework, and I can
Yeah.
tell from the intention that you have with the words that you chose around your values that they're really meaningful
Yes.
to your company.
Yep.
How would you describe your culture to someone that is never set foot inside your company?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously those values are a part of it. The pride is a huge part of it, but we're also there's some other factors that are important to our success and important to why we do have long tenured employees. We are a very nimble kind of company, and so that results in our culture. Most everyone here is trained to do multiple jobs, and that's a reality of small business and of just the business environment, right? Being able to switch and back up other people when people are out and things like that. So we're very nimble, very cross-trained, very wired to help out in other departments. So we just had Pi Day, March 14th is like an important day for us because you
Love
use
me some
pi.
Pie Day. Yeah,
Yes, and you use pi to calculate your hat size. So it like really is a connection to our brand.
that's true. I
Yes,
learned about that recently. That's how I got to a 7 1/4 size pie is involved in
exactly.
that formula.
Yes. And so we have a big sale every day on Pi Day. So it's a one, this is generally a slower time of year, but we have this one day that's like a Black Friday kind of size day. Well, I can't staff up for this one day to get 1,000 packages out the door. So like everyone in this part of the building where the office people are, we were all in the back, packing boxes, making boxes, picking orders, doing all of those things. And that's a pretty common occurrence around here. When one department has a spike, people from other areas will come in and help.
So if someone was considering your company, would they know these things from the outside, or do you really have to be inside Stormy Kromer to experience them?
Yeah, I'm not sure how they would know from the outside. I think it is something that you can tell people this stuff in an interview or something as you're recruiting, but it's hard to know I think until you're here. The other piece that I should mention too that's pretty important is just like the flexibility we have with our employees. We will kind of accommodate lots of different schedules, even though we have a production line that makes it hard sometimes, but we have lots of part-time workers because that's what works for them. We have, lots of people with families and they need to go and take care of their families at different times. And we're just really like as understanding as we can be to keep a production line going through those things. And I think that you don't necessarily feel that until you've done it. And we have a number of employees who actually worked for us, left and came back and said, well, I didn't realize some of the benefits of the culture here until I went somewhere else and didn't have those things. Like I think sometimes they're taken for granted a little bit. And it's just the way that we've worked for a really long time. In addition to my family being here, we've always had other, we have a mother son that work for us currently. We have a couple that works for us currently. Like we've always been a culture with these kind of intertwined relationships. And that just means that it means that we're kind of understanding that people have lives outside of work, and we do our best to accommodate that.
Yeah, flexibility is such a
Yeah.
huge part and a theme that we hear often when we're talking to people about their culture. What have you done there to intentionally build your culture?
That's a really good question. I do think I do believe that the intertwining of the values into lots of different practices is a key part of that. I mentioned we put them into our performance reviews. We have like quarterly meetings with the whole company to talk about how things went in that quarter. We also recognize folks, and I actually ask employees like right on the spot, like, hey, I want you to tell me about a coworker that you saw embody one of our values this last quarter and, give them a little bit of a shout out. So I think that's a huge part of it. When we gather together to maybe review something that didn't go so well, right? We always link that back to those values and like, hey, this didn't result in quality for the customer. So we missed there. How are we going to fix that going forward? So I think that's a huge part of it. I think there's also a lot of pretty intentional transparency we have with our employees. That, the foundation to culture to a positive culture, right, is trust at the end of the day. And transparency is a huge part of that. We went through a whole leadership process with a company out of Green Bay called Initiative One. And they have a process called the leadership transformation process. And we've probably put 20, managers and leaders through that over the course of several years. And that's really focused on like setting up these foundations for an environment of trust. So like making sure, and they have all these great kind of phrases that describe these things, but like putting the things on the table, right? And like talking about them and not having a meeting after the meeting where 2 or 3 people are grumbling about something when they should have brought it up in the meeting, right? And discussed it. And so we've been working with them, gosh, probably for 5 or 6 years. And those kinds of principles are really intentional to people feeling like they can bring up issues, feeling like they can share their opinion, feeling like they can say, hey, I think something's going through the line with the wrong color thread. We got to stop. Like, this is not right. So that's been a very intentional and like an investment we've made in our employees to help us have that common language and help us to have a place where we are open and honest with each other and can, tackle the challenges that help us then move forward in alignment with our values.
Yeah, you can tell just from sharing those examples how culture is ingrained in what you do. And you make that investment in people so
Yeah.
they can be good stewards of that culture.
Yeah.
Are there any stories that come to mind? Culture, it's easy to describe, and we all have values on our walls and
Right.
things like that. But just specific stories where you really feel like the culture at Stormy Kromer shone through, and you were proud to lead the company.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple. A couple of them, or one I want to give you is from a long time ago, and I wasn't even here when it happened, but I do think it speaks to the culture really well. This speaks to that relationship piece I mentioned earlier. When we were doing business with this large pet supply company that was about an hour and a half from here, and they switched over a weekend to like an automated picking system. Huge advancement, right? Robots picking orders. And it completely failed. Like, it completely failed when they went live with it. We had about a week where we had my dad rented a bus, and we had employees after they worked here a full day. They got in a bus, they went to Rhinelander, and they put in half a shift to help our customer out, like, because they hadn't staffed properly because they thought this picking thing was going to work. So that's just such a huge, and that people did that just shocks me. Like, I was in college at that time, I was away, but that's an amazing thing. We also had a project that we did early on when I came back. The ice rink at Northern Michigan University hosted the 2010 speed skating trials, and they didn't have the right kind of pads to outfit the rink that met like the international standards for safety. And so they came to us because we have this reputation of, like, in addition to Stormy Kromer, like, that we can sew anything, right? If it's thread and a sewing machine and a fabric, we can figure it out. So we, I think this speaks to our flexibility, our ingenuity, figured out what they needed, figured out how to construct it so that it met these standards, so that like the right amount of force could be absorbed by these pads. We worked with our suppliers to get them to donate the materials, and then most of the sewing was done by our employees on volunteer time because they wanted to be a part of that. So they would come in on a Saturday and do that. So like, all of that is the pride and the passion. And the last thing I'll say, which I think is an interesting story, it's not going to sound like a success at first, but one of the things just this last year, one of the biggest additions to our product line was launching a collegiate licensed collection. And, just our normal hats in some different colors with the logos on them. And we were really like looking for something that was like, the year wasn't starting off looking super great, like not the way we wanted. And so we're like, what can we do? What is like, okay, we can make more hats. Like, that's easy. So we started to embark on this process, which is a whole process of the licensing and getting approval and getting everything right and the right call, like all of that stuff. And I will say that this was one of the times that I was leading a initiative, and I had a lot of people who didn't think it was a good idea, like that were kind of dragging their feet, didn't see the potential, saw it as some extra work. But as I have reflected on that, I think because of the kind of culture we have and because of some of those trust things that we've established that I talked about earlier, I think there was a lot of like, well, I don't see how this is going to be good, but I'm going to go along with it. I'm going to just, we're going to see. I'm not going to maybe rah rah about it. I'm not going to be, super whatever about it, but we'll get it done. We'll do what Gina's, asking us to do. And the minute it was sort of an instant success when we launched it. And the attitude changed just like that. Like, then it was like, oh, wow, like we're going to be behind this. And now it's like a huge part of our identity. My team that does the embroidery has a big bulletin board with all the logos on it because I like to show them off on the tours. But it was like, sometimes as a leader, right? Sometimes you're leading things that maybe not everyone sees the potential of. And that's okay because that's part of your job as a leader, right? To maybe see things. But if you have the right culture, you can still make it happen and you can still have it turn out to be a success.
Yeah, those are great examples, and just sharing how your team stepped up and even followed the direction without maybe being sure of it, but
Right.
still believing in that culture of trust that you
Yes.
describe. That's something really special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
At Stormy Kromer, who owns culture? Is it leadership, HR, marketing, someone else?
That is an awesome question. And I'm not sure I've ever thought of it exactly that way, but I do know that you can't force a culture from the top, right? Like, this is not, I can't just wake up one day and say, this is our culture. Like, that's not real. It's just like when you talk about your brand. Your brand is what customers think of you, right? Your brand is not what you say it is. And I think your culture is the experience that people have in it every day, right? It's not, like you said earlier, some crap on a wall. Um, so I do think it is something that is owned by everyone to some extent. I think that, our leadership team, which there's 5 of us, certainly are the ones that are kind of making decisions about where we're going to be more intentional, right? About highlighting those values and bringing them up and including them in different processes. HR is a part of that management team, our production managers, sales and marketing. So I would say if I had to pick a smaller group that owns our culture, it would be our management team that represents all those different facets of the company and is thinking about when and how to make them sort of rise them up into a more intentional place.
Yeah, I like what you said about around leadership, and these weren't exactly the words that you used, but you said management kind of owns it. I think management's the stewards in the way that you're describing it, and
Right.
I really like how you brought it back and said that everybody owns that culture and it's a representation of those experiences. So that was a really insightful answer.
Right.
Yeah. Candidates, people in general have more options to work than ever before. You can live in the UP and you can work in California. So
Yep.
how do you attract the right people that fit your culture to Stormy Kromer?
Sure. That is an excellent question. I think one of, when you talked about, having a job in California, one thing I should add about our culture that just made me think of that is that we are really in person. Like we have a very strong in person culture because we make stuff here, right? And there is this expectation that you might have to go. I went and inspected hats in December because our hat inspector called in sick and someone had to do it. So we don't really have remote workers even in our office jobs. So that makes it more challenging and in some extent because we are looking for people who can at least be here most of the time. But particularly when we hire managers or sort of those level positions, we have actually done exercises where we ask them to talk about their values. We bought this like card deck of all these different values. So there's just a word on each one. And we will give them some time to like go through there and pick out the 5 that they think are best. And then tell us about them, right? And so in the act of making that decision and, talking about what, how that relates to them, even if they're not like the exact 5, obviously I'm not looking for someone who has the same 5 values as we do, but like, do they align, right? And is there a fit there? So that's definitely something that we do with managers or directors or things like that. With our production workers, part of the interview process is to walk through the production floor and show them the culture. We even sit them down at a sewing machine and say, here, you can hit the foot pedal. You can kind of get a vibe for that. But being out on our floor, again, I mentioned people that take our tour can get a vibe for the culture. So getting people on our production floor as a part of the interview process, and then just having a conversation with them about what they're seeing, and just sort of how things flow and work. It ends up being a conversation where you can kind of get a vibe if they're gonna if this is the kind of place that they're gonna be a fit in and that they're gonna enjoy. And at the end of the day, there's no right or wrong that my culture is better than some other culture, right? It's like, is it the right fit for you, as you said?
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it. What kind of person would thrive in Stormy Kromer's culture, and what kind of person wouldn't?
Yeah, great question. So, if you want to come to work and do the same exact thing every day, then this is not the place for you. So that's fine. There are jobs where you can do that. Even our production workers might have a main job, but they get moved around a lot. So if you are looking for a variety of tasks, if you are looking to be a part of something that is going to be seen and worn and sold, not just nationally, but internationally, if that excites you, if you like the excitement maybe of new initiatives, new projects, it's that kind of like the nimbleness, I think, has to appeal to you to be a good candidate here. And if you want to, like, we need people who are going to put their heart into this and that are going to care. And that's a really important piece for us, that that pride. I know I keep coming back to it, but it's such a huge part and it's rooted in everything else. We are definitely need people who are going to come here and take pride in what they do. And that means whether it is sewing a hat, whether that is doing accounts payable, it doesn't matter, right? Like, you are representing a brand that a lot of people think really highly of and enjoy, and every part of that needs to be a good experience. And so yeah, we're looking for that. I would say the other things that, we don't have, and some of these, some of your listeners might see as maybe, somewhat deficits, but it just is our culture. We are not highly structured. And some employees need a really structured environment. Yes, we have job descriptions and we have all those things, but there is so much flexibility here, which just is a nature of our size and the environment that we're in, that you have to be okay with, that other duties as assigned is a thing here, and you have to be okay with that. Sometimes I don't know if people are familiar with the Strengths Finder, like assessment. I believe it's in
Yeah.
Strengths Finder that there's something called like comfort with ambiguity, and like you have to have that to live here, to work here, because there's going to be some stuff that we go sometimes before we've 100% figured it out. And so you gotta be okay with that to work here.
I like that, other duties as assigned. I think I want to borrow that.
And I don't mean to we don't take advantage of people in that way. It's not
Mhm.
like I'm piling on a bunch of extra work that really means they should get a promotion or things like that. It's just that weird stuff comes up, or that there's like someone is out and we need help. And, our accounts payable and receivable folks also help in the retail store when we need them to, over lunch break, because 3 people are out and there's no one else to cover it. So I think some people hear that and like, oh, well, does that mean you take advantage of employees? Absolutely not. It means we got to be nimble and flexible. And sometimes some things are going to come up that we couldn't even have predicted to put on someone's job description.
Yeah, you need employees who can figure it out, and
Yeah,
it seems like that adaptability is a big part of your
for sure.
culture. So make the business case for your culture. How do you feel your culture impacts your business performance?
Oh, I have said this in different interviews I've done or different videos we've done of our factory floor, but I 100% believe that that pride our people have winds up in our finished products. Like I believe that people can feel that and see it when they wear and touch our stuff. That might sound a little out there, a little woo woo, but like that's my perception, and I think it's very, very real. So I think that pride, that caring, that working with people as human beings, not as just a name on a list, always comes back to benefit you. Um, the relationships you build, all of it may not be immediate, but I believe there's this long-term cycle that things come back to you when you just are good human beings and treat people well, and have that pride in what you do. So I honestly can't imagine running a business any other way. Um, and I absolutely think that that gets to the customer and comes out on the bottom line eventually. Maybe not right away, but it does at the end.
Stormy Kromer is a brand that has stood the test of time. What advice would you give to a leader that was trying to build a culture in a company that has longevity?
100%. I think, for Stormy Kromer, a huge part of it is the same kind of like intentionality about our values, like our corporate values and our values with each other. There is that intentionality with the brand. And I think that's a huge part of why Stormy Kromer is still around. At the end of the day, that hat with the ear flaps still exists because it's a product that does what it says it's going to do. And it was designed right from the first place. And we kind of like always harken back to that as whether it's developing new products, whether it's like how we're marketing things, how we're talking about them, how we're designing them, how we're the actual construction of them. Like, is this like it always goes back to that hat? Like, does this sit well with something like this that is so purposeful, right? And like, would George and Ida be proud of this coat? And if the answer is no, then maybe it doesn't need to be in the line. And so I think, Stormy Kromer has been around, and honestly, it's been stewarded by people other than me for most of its history, right? We've only had it 25 years. But it's because it's the product, and then, there wasn't a lot of marketing before we got it, but like the marketing that we're doing is like intentional, and it's about the people and the kinds of people that wear our products and use our products, and they kind of happen to overlap pretty strongly with the kind of people that work here, right? Hardworking, resilient, living in the UP. So just having that focus and keeping that clarity on what you are doing and not chasing after 100 other shiny pennies, which is so tempting as an entrepreneur, and you think you can do it all. But I think our focus and our sort of always coming back to the core of the brand to say, does this extension make sense, is part of the reason we're still around.
If you had to tell one story to someone considering joining your company about your culture, what would you tell them?
Oh. I think partially what I would tell them is that I think the story that we've had people who have worked here quit and come back is a huge testament to our culture. Like, I think people don't come back to a company or refer their friends and family to work at a company if it's not a kind of place they want to be, right? And so I think that's a huge part of it. I think that I'm just trying to think of a specific story, one that I haven't told you already. I think I would share the story of someone, she's retired now, but for many, many years, she was the lady who at the end of the hat line tied the tie on the hat, right? So all the hats have that little bow tie in the front. And I mean, she did 600 hats a day. Just tie and ties. That's all she did. Tie ties, tie ties, put on hang tags. And that woman was so intense about her job, because she also, part of the job is also that's final inspection, right? The final looking at it. And she had, we always use her as one of our examples of the proud and passionate value. She told me that whenever she was out of town, and if she was walking down the street and she saw someone else wearing a Kromer that wasn't tied properly, she would literally stop them, tell them who she was, that she was the person at Stormy Kromer that tied the ties, and that their tie needed to be retied. And she would take it off their head and retie it for them. And that kind of like pride plus a little spunk, which is, I would say, is also pretty prevalent here, right? There's a little bit of like audacity to think you can run a world-class brand out of a town of 5,000 people. I think that story of Lynn would be a pretty good one to say, like, these are the kind of people we're looking for. People that care that much and people that have that pride in what they do and wanting it to be perfect out in the world.
That pretty much says it all right there. Thanks so much for your time today, Gina. Appreciate you sharing your story and talking about Stormy Kromer's culture. And thank you to everyone for tuning in to the Winning Cultures podcast.